They say legacy's made of stone and blood, but mine was built on wood and water. Simple bridge strung across narrow creek that knew the names of my grandfather, my father, and now mine. That morning I returned from court exhausted, gavel echoes still ringing in my ears, Tyloosan black robe tossed in the back seat, not knowing that my world had already been split in two. Gravel popped beneath the tires of my truck as I neared the ridge. My gaze swept forward and faltered. Something was wrong. The air felt wrong. And then I saw it. A mess of broken planks, shattered beams, and twisted bolts scattered like bones across the muddy banks. The bridge was gone. Just gone. Like it had never existed. I killed the engine, my boots hitting the earth before the dust settled. The place where the bridge had stood, strong, weathered, dignified, was now just scar in the land. Splinters floated downstream, evidence of history demolished without warning, without permission, without sense. I stood in silence, the wind snapping at bright orange, signs staked in the ground like victory flag. Unauthorized structure removed for community safety. It read, bearing the smug logo of the Lakeside Ridge Association. ORA Compliance Division. My breath hitched, my fists curled. They didn't just tear down wood and nails. They desecrated something sacred. Structure built by my grandfather's hands, reinforced by my father's grit, and registered under federal preservation law with my signature on the final restoration file. They hadn't just crossed the line. They bulldozed through it, blindfolded and arrogant. But the most galling part, they had no idea who I was. I raised my phone and began taking pictures. Wide angles, close-ups, the sign, the damage, the trajectory of destruction. My hand shook not from rage, but from the cold precision of what I knew would come next. I didn't rush into shoving matches or lawsuits. That's not how federal judges operate. We wait, we build, we devastate. With process, as I crouched near the creek, capturing the last half-submerged timber, voice rang out behind me. Hey, Judge, you all right? Martin, my ranch hand of over a decade, stood at the edge of the ridge, brow furrowed. He stepped closer, boots crunching over debris. What the hell happened here? He asked. I straightened. Oh, I said. His eyes widened. The same folks who said last month they didn't want anything to do with your land? I nodded. And now they've done this. We stood there, watching the water swallow bits of our past. Martin didn't say another word. He didn't need to. Later that day, I visited the HOA office. It was a sterile building that didn't belong in the rural sprawl of our county. Glass panels, polished stone, a pathetic fountain at the front that hadn't worked in years. I walked in. The receptionist barely glanced up. Can I help you? She said. Yes, I replied. I'm here to speak with whoever authorized the removal of bridge on private, federally protected land. She blinked and began typing. You're not in our system, she said. Your property isn't under HOA jurisdiction. Exactly, I replied. That's what makes this visit necessary. Just then, man walked out from the back. Tall, balding, with name tagged that read Ed Branson, HOA vice president. He spotted me and approached with the calm smugness of someone who thought he was in control. Is there a problem, sir? Yes, I said. You tore down bridge that didn't belong to you. That rickety old thing? He chuckled. We received complaints. Said it looked unstable. Our compliance team took initiative. Did you notify the county? The state? The Department of the Interior? I asked. He shrugged. Didn't think it was necessary. But we were doing the community favor. You weren't, I said flatly. You made massive legal mistake. He folded his arms. Look, judge or not, if you want posery in our community, nah, I snapped. My land sits outside your map, your reach, and your authority. The receptionist looked up, suddenly alert. But Ed didn't seem fazed. Well, he said, maybe it's time your property became part of the community. That was it. The moment everything snapped into focus. This wasn't about safety. It wasn't about appearances. It was about control. It didn't want the bridge gun because it was dangerous. It wanted it gunned because it was in the way. A vision, a plan. A land grab under the guise of beautification. I walked out without another word, but the silence that followed was heavier than any courtroom I'd ever stood in. That night, I combed through records. The bridge had been officially registered on the National Historic Infrastructure Index for over 2 decades. The paperwork was meticulous. Measurements, photos, repairs, cultural significance. I had enough ammunition to bury them in litigation for a decade, but I wasn't ready to fire yet. Not until I'd built the case to precision. Martin and I returned to the site the next morning. We laid out caution tape. I added federal property signs, installed motion sensors and trail cams. I wanted documentation, movement logs, timestamps. because I knew something most men don't. Cowards escalate when they feel cornered, and these were cowards with clipboards. That evening, while reviewing civil case summaries in my home office, my phone chimed. Motion alert from the ridge. I opened the feed. 3 men, dark clothes, flashlights sweeping over the grass. One kicked over a sign. Another took photos. The third marked the ground with small flags. Survey flags. It weren't vandals. It were scouting. I called Martin. Get the interview, I said. We've got company. We rode through the trees, engine cut low, heads off. When we reached the creek bed, we saw them. They froze in our lights like startled game. One bolted, the others tried to act casual. I stepped off the ATV and took out my phone. You're trespassing on federally protected property, I said. One of them turned white. We didn't know, he stammered. We were told. By who? I cut him off. They didn't answer. They ran. And next morning, I compiled everything. Photos, videos, timestamps, and prepared dossier. The bridge demolition memo, the footage, the trespassing. But just as I sealed the manila envelope meant for my contact in the Department of the Interior, a sound echoed from the edge of the ranch. A boom. Not thunder. Not machinery. A controlled explosion. I raced to the back lot with Martin on my heels. Smoke was already curling into the sky. The old shed. Nothing more than a tool shack, but sitting on the same federally documented parcel. Was engulfed in flames. It wasn't an accident. Fuel cans were tossed aside, scorched, their metal warped. Someone had firebombed historical site. That's when I knew. This wasn't mistake. It was a message. I didn't sleep. I pulled the camera feeds. One of the same men from the night before was there. Creeping toward the shed, flick of light, and then the screen burst white. I saved the footage and sent it to the U.S. Marshals and my personal legal counsel. The law was no longer on standby. It was coming. Still, I said nothing publicly. Let them dig their own graves. They thought they were operating in the shadows. But I had turned every tree into witness. 3 days later, I got the call. Judge Carter, voice said, crisp and authoritative. This is Hannah Thomas, Department of Justice. We've reviewed your file. I'll be leading the investigation personally. Are you available for site inspection this week? I didn't blink. Bobby here, I said. Good, she replied. Because this might be the first case we bring to court a nationwide review of HOA overreach. I hung up the phone and stepped outside. The stars above the ridge blinked in silence. The bridge was still gone, but the war had begun, and I was done playing defense. The morning after the Department of Justice confirmed they were opening a nationwide investigation into HOA overreach, I found myself staring at the blank spot where the bridge once stood, hands on my hips, breathing in the silence. But silence no longer felt peaceful. It felt tactical, like a held breath before another strike. I wasn't wrong. By noon, Martin returned from town carrying a letter. The envelope was thick, official-looking, and marked with red ink. Notice of property foreclosure intent. I took it from him and read the contents twice, and third time. The HOA had filed a lien against my property, claiming I owed them $27,419 in back dues, landscaping violations, late penalties, and something absurd called nonconformity to community aesthetics. I almost laughed. My land wasn't part of their community. It never had been. I'd never signed document, never agreed to their regulations. Legally, jurisdiction ended quarter mile before my boundary marker. But this was never about law. It was about pressure. Bullying disguised as bureaucracy. I folded the notice carefully, slid it into file marked evidence, and walked into my office without word. At night, I couldn't sleep. Not out of fear, but focus. I stayed up reviewing deeds, pulling every record, plat map, and federal exemption paper I'd kept since the ranchers passed down to me. The bridge had been their opening act. The fire, their message. Now they wanted to choke me out with paper and stamps. But I wasn't just man with land. I was man who signed federal orders, who interpreted law for a living, and who now had the Department of Justice backing him. The next morning, I called. A friend at the State Attorney General's office. This HOA just filed fraudulently and on protected property, I said. I got the original deed, zoning maps, and ruling from the county judge 5 years ago confirming exemption. Send it over, he said. And Carter, be careful. If they're bold enough to try this, they're desperate. I had hunched he was right, but I underestimated how quickly desperation turns into action. That afternoon, Martin and I were fixing a fence post at the southern edge of the ranch when we noticed a crew of workers in yellow safety vests parked by the road. They were lowering a metal utility box into the back of their truck. I jogged down the hill. Hey, I shouted. One of them looked up, startled. What's going on here? We're with Ridgem, he said. pulling our equipment. Oh, he gave the order. I frowned. That booster box was installed by my internet provider, not the HOA's contractor. We were told this land is now under the Lakeside Ridge extension. I pulled out my phone, pulled up the land boundary map, and held it in front of his face. Do you see this parcel ID? This land is not, has never been, and will never be part of your subdivision. He shifted nervously. Look, man, we were just following instructions. I asked, who gave you permission to enter my property and remove private equipment? He hesitated. We got call from the association office. I didn't need to hear more. I began filming. You just admitted on camera to removing equipment you don't own from land you don't control, based on verbal orders from third party with no legal standing. That stuff. He backed away. It's misunderstanding. And no, I said, stepping closer. It's crime. And now it's documented. They packed up and left, but the damage was done. I filed another report that evening, attaching the video, the false foreclosure notice, and the schematics of the stolen infrastructure. The Dodge confirmed receipt within hours. They were watching now, closely, but the hoe wasn't done. The following morning, Martin brought in another letter, this one delivered by hand, not mail. It was zoning proposal, an actual printed document stamped by the HOA's District Expansion Committee. I scanned the contents. It proposed redistricting the entirety of my ranch into the Lakeside Ridge Zoning Board retroactively, based on revision of community development priorities. They were trying to annex my land, on paper, without consent, without precedent. It was laughable, if it wasn't so dangerous. I drafted a response, but instead of sending it to them, I sent it to the Dodge, the State Ag, and the County Registrar's office. Then I made copies and taped them to the fence at every edge of my property. Let them try again. 2 days passed, no new letters, no new crews, but the quiet didn't last. Late that Friday night, Martin and I were walking the perimeter, checking trail cams, when we noticed the cattle weren't where they should be. The north pasture gate stood open, not just unlatched, cut clean through. A rusted chain lay on the ground like a drop snake. We jumped into the truck and tore down the old gravel road, head sweeping through trees and thickets. The herd had scattered. We found them nearly a mile away, near the edge of the forest, disoriented and agitated. It took 2 hours to round them up and get them back. When we returned, I inspected the chain. It had been clipped with bolt cutters, not rusted through, not broken by accident. Someone had released the herd on purpose, to cause chaos, to harm, to provoke. I didn't say anything. As followed another report. This time, the charge was property sabotage of potential endangerment to livestock. By now, the pattern was clear. Every time I pushed back, they escalated. Paper led to fire, fire led to surveillance, surveillance to physical intrusion, and now they were endangering animals. The next morning, I checked the trail cam footage again. A figure, hooded, had been captured walking the fence line near the gate at 3:21 a.m. Another image, this time blurry, showed them crouched near the latch before the feed cut out entirely. Someone had disabled it, or jammed it. I contacted Hannah Thomas. They're not just committing legal overreach anymore, I said. They're running coordinated campaign of harassment. She didn't hesitate. I'll send federal team for inspection and forensic suite. Don't confront anyone alone. That afternoon, I received visitor. Not law enforcement, not neighbor, man I didn't recognize. He drove an older pickup parked at the edge of my gravel drive and walked to the gate alone. I met him halfway. You from the HOA? I asked, not officially what he said, but I'm on the board. Or was... He looked tired, older, gray at the temples, with a heavy weight in his eyes. I didn't vote for the demolition, he said. I told them it was a bad idea, that you weren't some stubborn rancher, that they were poking bear with federal badge. I didn't respond. He reached into his jacket, pulled out an envelope, and handed it over. Inside was personal check, $5,000, along with a note on HOA stationery that read, in shaky handwriting, settlement for damages and inconvenience. I laughed out loud. $5,000 for federally protected bridge, for shed torched with accelerants, for livestock driven into the woods. He looked embarrassed. I told them it wouldn't work. You were right, I said. He turned and left without another word. That night, I stood on the porch and stared out across the land. The stars above were clear, sharp. The wind carried the scent of old timber and smoke. Somewhere, an owl called, and I whispered to no one in particular, you picked the wrong man. The next day, black subs rolled up the drive. The Department of Justice had arrived. But I had the feeling the HOA's biggest mistake hadn't even been made yet. The Dodge team arrived at dawn, unannounced but expected. 3 black subs coasted over the gravel road like sharks in low tide. Hannah Thomas stepped out first, sharp in posture, quiet in presence. Behind her, team of 5 agents, 2 carrying forensic kits, 1 with drone case, another with clipboard thicker than the county budget. Judge Carter, she nodded. We're ready for full walkthrough. I led them through everything, starting at the remnants of the bridge. The site now cordoned with markers and flagged with evidence stakes. The chart outline of the shed came next. Then the newly cut north pasture gate. They cataloged, measured, snapped photos from every angle. Hannah squatted beside the utility post where Ridgem had pulled their equipment and muttered, "They didn't just unplug this. They drilled into the ground. That's tampering with private infrastructure." Federal, I didn't reply. I didn't have to. This wasn't just about violations anymore. This was about intent. Coordinated. Calculated. Criminal. By mid-afternoon, I had returned to the house when I received a call from a local journalist named Kelly Rowe. She caught wind of the federal team and wanted to know if I had statement. Not yet, I said. Let the facts stack first. But the silence didn't hold. At night, while locking the barn, I noticed the cattle weren't just anxious. They were missing, again. I ran to the pasture and froze. The gate that had been repaired just days ago was not only cut. It was gone. No chain. No posts. No hinges. Just tire marks and silence. I fired up the truck, tore down the road into the dark, searching. Martin joined me in his ADV. We found hoof prints leading toward the tree line, but the herd was scattered, spooked deeper than before. This time, though, something was different. A flash of metal glinted in the underbrush. I approached and found a small, blinking black device. Not a camera, not a radio, a tracker, small, rugged, and military grade. I radioed Martin. We've got surveillance tech on our land. He didn't respond right away. Then I just found one too, under the trough by the creek. The cattle hadn't just been released. They were being tracked. We spent hours sweeping the area and recovered 2 more. One attached under the barn's weather vane and another embedded beneath my truck's rear bumper. Whoever was behind this had access to gear that didn't come from a hardware store. The next morning, I delivered all devices to Hannah. She examined them, her brows furrowed deeper with each one. This isn't just surveillance. These are motion-triggered and GPS SOG. Someone's logging patterns, likely to build schedule, test reactions, maybe even map vulnerability windows. For what? I asked. She didn't answer immediately. Then, take your security up 2 levels. This isn't HOA anymore. You're in someone's way. That phrase stuck with me all day. In someone's way. Because it was never really about the HOA. It was about what lay beneath it. That same afternoon, package arrived. No sender, no markings except courier label from private delivery service. Inside was letter, heavy bond paper, embossed with corporate seal I didn't recognize. A single line typed across the center. We represent parties interested in acquiring your property. Please contact us to negotiate terms amenable to all involved. Below that, contact name. No company, no title, just number. I folded it, slid it into the file, and called Hannah again. They're done hiding behind legal fiction, I said. Now they're coming with smiles and checkbooks. Send it to us, she said. We'll trace it. I knew she would, but I also knew I wouldn't wait. That evening, I went live. I stood at the edge of the bridge site, camera set up, microphone pinned, and told the story. Not just my story, but the truth. About the HOA, the false liens, the burned shed, the trespassers, the surveillance, the trackers. I didn't editorialize. I just reported facts. I closed by saying this isn't about money. It's about legacy, about law, and about people who think they can rewrite both without consequence. The video spread faster than I expected. Within 24 hours, I had messages from reporters in New York, veterans in Nevada, retired farmers in Texas, all sharing stories of being bullied, fined, or coerced by their HOAs. Some had lost land. Others had simply given up, but none of them had pushed back. Not like this. The next day, the backlash began. Black SUV with no plates parked 100 yards from my gate and sat idle for hours. Another tracker was found, this one in Martin's truck. At this point, we weren't even surprised. But what did catch us off guard was the escalation. Martin returned from town that night and found a man sitting on his porch. Calm, composed, dressed in clean gray suit and holding briefcase. "You Carter's man?" he asked. "Depends who's asking," Martin said. "I'm here on behalf of the parties interested in the resolution of this dispute." "Dispute?" Martin asked. "You mean the crimes?" The man smiled. There are easier ways to fix this than courtrooms and cameras. Martin didn't respond. He just reached for his phone, snapped photo, and said, "Leave." No, the man stood, nodded slightly, and disappeared into the night. But the message was clear. They were done asking. 2 mornings later, Hannah called. Her voice was tighter than usual. We traced the funding for the HOA, and they're being bankrolled by real estate group out of Miami. Offshore holdings, shell companies. They specialize in hostile land acquisition for luxury developments. Your property sits at the dead center of their proposed smart community initiative. I exhaled. They tried to use HOA structure as front for the expansion. Exactly, she said. Ed Branson's name is all over the paper trail, but he's not the top. He's just mouthpiece, so who's? We're still pulling corporate filings, but preliminary analysis suggests holding group tied to international investors. And they're nervous now. We froze several accounts this morning. Then I should expect visitors, I said. Hannah didn't argue. At night, the sky buzzed with drones. 7 total. They flew low, circled the barn, hovered over the house. One zipped within inches of my bedroom window. I grabbed the net launcher I'd built, waited until it passed again, and fired. Caught it midair. The propellers whined as it dropped. We baggage cracked the case open and found a microSIM tied to a cellular uplink routed through a spoofed European server. I forwarded everything to the Dodge. By now, it was no longer about legality. It was about nerve, about pressure. They were seeing if I'd fold. But the more they pressed, the more I braced. I wasn't protecting just ranch. I was protecting precedent. Because if they could take mine, they could take anyone's. The pressure built until it finally snapped. A week later, I received federal summons to appear for an emergency hearing. The judge assigned Janet Miller, a friend. Someone who had once told me there's nothing more dangerous than a quiet man with the law on his side. I smiled when I saw her name. The hammer was rising, and when it fell, it would fall loud. The emergency hearing was set for Monday, and by Friday afternoon, the courthouse parking lot was already lined with news vans. The moment I stepped inside, I could feel a shift. Not in power, but in perception. The courtroom was full. Ranchers from across the county filled the benches beside journalists, local families, and even Lakeside Ridge residents who had once voted for the very board that now sat on the defense. At the plaintiff's table, I sat in simple suit, no robe, no titles, just man defending what was his. On the other side, Ed Branson sat flanked by 3 attorneys, one of them from firm known for burying opposition in paperwork and delay tactics. Judge Janet Miller entered. Promptly at 9, gave short nod in my direction, then called the case. Carter v. Lakeside Ridge Association. My lawyer, Ethan Grant, opened with precision. He laid out a timeline so tight it rang like a drumline, an authorized demolition of a federally protected structure, fire damage on listed heritage land, falsified zoning maps, fraudulent foreclosure notices, attempted surveillance, and physical tampering with telecommunications infrastructure. He closed with a single photo. The bronze plaque that had once stood on the bridge, now cracked in 2, found downstream days after the demolition. This isn't just negligence, Ethan said. It's systemic abuse of power, carried out under the illusion of community management, but in reality serving private financial interests. One of the HOA's lawyers objected, calling the statement speculative. Judge Miller didn't blink. Speculation is the only currency they've dealt in so far. Overruled. The room buzzed. Branson squirmed. It tried to mount defense. Claimed clerical error, blamed anonymous contractors, cited maps, approved years prior that were never recorded with the county. With every excuse came contradiction. Every claim unraveled with timestamps, signatures, footage, and public records. By noon, it was done. Judge Miller granted an immediate federal injunction, freezing all HOA actions related to my land. This court finds the defendant's conduct not only outside their authority, she said, but dangerously close to criminal conspiracy. Ed's smirk finally cracked. I didn't smile. I just gathered my documents and walked out. At weekend, something changed. Not just in the courtroom, but across the country. My story made headlines. I was sued by federal judge. Protected bridge destroyed. Land grabbed and covered in national sting. And suddenly my inbox was flooded. Not with threats, but with stories. People from Arizona to Georgia, Michigan to Texas, all telling me about the gardens that were bulldozed, the flags that were banned, the fences that were fined, the homes they almost lost over invented fees. But I also started getting offers. Too many of them, developers, investors, Anonymous proposals with $1 million figures. One company even mailed me a replica of my bridge carved in glass, promising to preserve the legacy if I signed over the deed. I didn't answer. I didn't even consider. I tossed the proposals in the fire pit behind the barn because this wasn't negotiation anymore. The rebuild began on Tuesday. I called an old team of craftsmen, I suppose. The D worked with during a courthouse restoration project in Santa Fe. Within a day they arrived. 5 men, all older, all quiet, and all professionals who understood what legacy meant. They didn't ask about the politics or the lawsuits. They just walked the creek, measured the ruins, and said, "We'll rebuild it exactly as it was." That was all I needed. Word spread. Ranchers brought tools. Retired carpenters offered to volunteer. Group of high school shop students came with their teacher and pickup full of lumber. What began as a quiet rebuild turned into a countywide project. People came to watch, to lift beams, to pour bolts into freshly carved holes. They brought food. They brought music. They brought stories. And they brought themselves, not to help me, but to help themselves. Because they'd all been hurt in smaller ways and were finally seeing someone fight back. By the end of the week, the frame of the bridge stood proud and raw in the morning light. We bolted a bronze plaque to the center post, engraved with a line from a letter we found buried beneath the old foundation. Written by my grandfather, sealed in rusted box along with the original blueprints. To my sons and grandsons. May this bridge always keep our family connected, no matter what storms try to tear it down. But storms, as always, weren't done. That Saturday night, the machines came, 3 of them. Bulldozers, graders, all painted in El beige of county contractors, but with no county markings. They parked just 20 feet from the construction zone, their engines humming low and ominous. Ed Branson was there, no hard hat, no clipboard, just standing like he still owned the world, even as the law peeled it away from him inch by inch. I walked toward him. "You've got 10 seconds to get off my land," I said. He didn't move, just pulled walkie and spoke one word, "Hold." He then turned to me, all arrogance and rot. "You built without permit," he said. "It's safety hazard." Or, "You have no jurisdiction," I said. "It's been ruled." He handed me folder. New maps, backdated approvals, signatures that smelled like forgery. "We filed updated district maps," he said. "As of this morning, your property falls under new HOA development expansion." I flipped through the papers, recognizing none of the names, all of the lies. "This is fraud," I said, "and it's going to bury you." He shrugged. "We'll see what the county says." I didn't have to answer. A minute later, had swept the ridge. 2 black subs, federal marshals. They stopped, stepped out, and one of them called Mr. Branson. Ed turned, surprised. "What?" "You're under arrest for trespassing on protected federal property, obstruction of federal investigation, and attempted forgery of land documents." Branson froze. His voice cracked. "You can't be serious." But they were. They cuffed him, read him his rights, and hauled him away. The machines were towed out by sunrise. The rebuild resumed before breakfast. By Monday, the bridge had become symbol. News crews arrived. State legislators called. And then Hannah returned, with folders so thick she needed help unloading it from her sofa. "We found it," she said, "the funding trail. Offshore accounts linked to a firm in the Cayman Islands masking itself behind 6 layers of shell corporations. They've done this before. Buy out local HOA boards, quietly redistrict land, file fake liens, force landowners to sell low, then flip it into luxury housing in smart cities. You were just the first to push back. Are they being prosecuted?" I asked. "We're moving forward with RICO case, racketeering, fraud, conspiracy, wire crimes, mail crimes, the full package." She paused. "But they'll push back hard." I nodded. Let them. That afternoon, drone buzzed overhead. Then another. Then 5 more. They flew low, erratic, sometimes crashing into trees, one nearly striking Martin's windshield. They were baiting us, filming us, harassing us. I caught 3 of them with a net launcher. The rest we shot down. Inside one was tiny listening device, disguised as lens. Another had SIM card traced to dummy company tied to the same offshore firm. I sent the evidence to the Dodge. Then I sent message. I called press conference at the rebuilt bridge. Stood before the cameras, the people, the land, and I spoke. This fight wasn't just about me. It's about how small systems grow into monsters when no one holds the leash. It's about the lies that dress as paperwork, the threats dressed as policy, and the theft dressed as community improvement. This bridge was taken from me. but now it stands taller than before. And for everyone watching from your own battlefields, don't wait for permission. Don't wait for justice to knock. Build your bridge and stand on it. The cheers lasted for minutes. Some clapped. Others cried. Many just nodded, silent but fierce. That night, as the creek whispered under new timbers and the moon cut clean across the sky, I stood beside Martin, sipping sweet tea, and said they thought they could build his legacy. He chuckled. You showed them they can't even dent it. But I knew even then the fight wasn't over. Not yet. Because some enemies don't die in daylight. They just reload. The bridge stood completed, its beams solid, its planks smooth under the weight of legacy and resistance. For the first time in weeks, the air across the ranch felt still, like the land was holding its breath in cautious relief. But peace has a fragile heartbeat, and mine was about to be interrupted again. That morning, as Martin and I ran final checks along the perimeter, we spotted a vehicle parked just outside the gate, a sleek black car, engine running, windows tinted, no plates. I approached slowly, Martin behind me, hand near the tool rack. The driver's window rolled down, and man in dark blazer leaned out, briefcase on the passenger seat. No introduction, no name, just a line delivered like a dare. Judge Carter, we'd like to make you an offer. I didn't respond. He stepped out, extended the briefcase, and added, it's substantial. You should at least read it. I took the envelope without word, turned, and walked back toward the porch. He waited like he expected reaction. When I reached the creek, I opened the envelope. Inside was a letter from known international development conglomerate, one with track record of controversial land takeovers. At the bottom, in bold ink, was number $18 million. I didn't even blink. Without a word, I folded the offer in half and tossed it into the water. It floated for a second, then sank below the current that ran beneath the new bridge. That was my answer. That night, I received a call from Hannah Thomas. Her voice was lower than usual. Judge, we've hit deeper layer, she said. There's still surveillance activity on your property. We believe someone inside the investigation may be leaking intel. We need to sweep again. I agreed. The next morning, her team arrived with new tech. Thermal drones, frequency jammers, and federal forensics unit. Within hours, they found 3 new tracking devices. One under the grain silo, one inside the barn's main beam, hollowed out and covered in dirt. The third had been placed directly inside the dashboard of Martin's ADV. These weren't amateur tools. They were military adjacent, coded, encrypted, and impossible to buy without access to black market or insider contracts. Hannah stood beside me at the fence, arms folded, wind tugging at her coat. They're watching you. 'Cause you're the keystone, she said. You fall, the case falls. I nodded. Then they picked the wrong foundation. That evening, the Dodge filed nationwide press release. Multi-state federal RICO investigation has been formally opened into network of HOA boards, shell corporations, and private developers suspected of racketeering, wire fraud, mail fraud, and property seizure under false authority. My case was listed first. The photos of the burned shed, the destroyed bridge, the forged maps, and the surveillance equipment now sat on the desk of federal prosecutors. The public response was immediate. I received thousands of emails, some supportive, some desperate, most heartbroken. People shared stories of intimidation over lawn heights, flags, paint colors, and pets. Many had lost their homes. Others had lost their peace. I printed those letters, each one, and capped them in a binder beside the original bridge blueprints, because this was never just about me. A week later, I was invited to testify before a congressional committee on property rights and HOA abuse. The hearing was scheduled for Washington, but the committee asked for a live video appearance due to security concerns. I agreed. The session was broadcast nationally. I sat in my office, the bridge visible through the window behind me, and spoke plainly. HOAs were created to protect homeowners, I said, but in too many cases, they've become unchecked micro-governments that answer to no one, enforce with impunity, and exploit silence. I didn't fight because I wanted attention. I fought because silence would have been surrender. The committee listened. Members nodded. Some asked technical questions. Others just said, thank you. But not everyone was grateful. That night, while walking the edge of the eastern pasture, I noticed fence post knocked over. Nearby, fresh tire tracks curved into the grass, leading toward the creek. Something glinted near the water. I picked it up, a small drone, damaged but intact. I opened its casing. Inside was not just camera, but motion sensor and small packet of data storage. They weren't just watching. They were collecting. The FOA was called. The drone was traced to a private contractor operating under defense contract registered in Florida. When contacted, the contractor claimed the drone had been requisitioned without authorization. But by then, the damage was done. The case had evolved again, from local HOA abuse to corporate espionage. The Dodge seized new assets. More board members resigned. Subpoenas were issued. And finally, Ed Branson's bail was revoked after he was caught attempting to transfer funds offshore using proxy identity. The hammer was falling, but the final blow came quietly. Late one evening, a rusted pickup truck pulled into my driveway. An older man stepped out. One I hadn't seen before. Introduced himself as Harold Dean, former HOA board member from another state. He'd seen the news, read the stories, and made the drive to shake my hand. You reminded us we're not powerless, he said, that we don't have to live under threats in our own homes. I thanked him, invited him in for coffee, and we talked for hours. About the past, about land, about dignity. When he left, he gave me a folded letter written by his late wife. In it, she described the garden she lost when her HOA fined her into bankruptcy. She ended with a line that stayed with me. The land remembers who protects it. That line played in my mind days later when I stood again at the bridge looking across the finished structure now weathered by sun and wind. Martin joined me, quiet as usual, sipping tea. "Do you think it's over?" he asked. I shook my head. "Not yet, but it's turning," and I was right. That same week, Congress introduced the Homeowner Fairness Act, bill requiring federal oversight of any HOA with over 100 properties, criminal penalties for fraudulent liens, and National Registry of HOA-related legal violations. The fight had gone from one ranch to nation, but justice isn't finish line. It's wall you hold until others arrive. And I kept holding. 2 days later, Hannah called. They pled guilty, she said. All of them, the board, the developers, even the shell firm in Miami. We got them all. I didn't respond immediately. Just watched the sun dip below the ridge, casting long shadows over the creek that ran beneath. A bridge they thought they could erase. "Thanks," I said. "Not for me. For everyone else." That night, I opened the last drawer of my cabinet and placed all the letters I'd received inside. Then I shut it, locked it, and sat down on the porch, boots up on the railing. The stars blinked overhead. The cattle grazed quietly. And for the first time since it all began, I did feel like I was preparing for war. I just felt home. 'Cause they tried to erase history, but instead they carved it in stone. And I reminded them and everyone watching that you don't mess with man's land, his family, or the bridge that ties them both together.